In this video, we're going to talk about authorization in ASP.NET MVC. Now, ASP itself does actually provide quite a few different authorization libraries and helpers and all that fun stuff. In fact, it goes so far as to provide an entire user role-based profile included authorization framework thing called the Membership API. We're not going to be touching the Membership API. I find that the Membership API has issues, especially when you want to start customizing it, which you inevitably will need to do. The good news is that writing your own authorization library and code is actually fairly easy. The better news is that it's also fairly easy to actually inject in your own code into the authorization pipeline of ASP.NET MVC. What do I mean by that? Well, if the Membership API is supposed to handle things like creating users and letting people log in and things like roles and profiles, we don't need any of that. All we need to do is to find a way to tell ASP.NET that this username is logged in and he has these roles. That is
That
it.
that sounds like some kind of filter.
Well, kind of.
Okay.
The issue with that, so we need a way to tell it what users have which roles, and we also need a way to prevent a action from being executed if the user does not have those roles. So we do that using a built-in filter. What a filter is a filter is a way to execute code during a controller action on all the actions in a controller, or on one action in particular out of a controller, or 10 actions, or 3 actions, or 1.5 actions. It doesn't matter. You can apply them to actions or classes. That's the point.
All right.
It gives you a level of granularity. I can either say this filter applies to all the actions in this controller, or just the ones I want. Actions come in the form of attributes that we apply to the classes or the methods. Now, I really don't want to allow anybody into the user's controller or the posts controller who isn't an admin. So I need a way to describe to ASP.NET, MVC specifically, that the only way to get into either of these controllers is by having a proper role. We do that with the Authorized attribute. The Authorized attribute takes in a couple parameters, but the most important one is the roles parameter. I can simply say authorized roles equals admin. Now this controller is entirely locked out from anybody who isn't logged in or anybody who isn't an admin. Sound good?
Yeah, that's making sense so far.
So now we go into user's controller and we do the same thing. And now I'm going to hit F6 because remember, we changed the CS file, we need to hit F6. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to try to access admin/posts. Look what I get.
There you go. You're not authorized.
Yep, I get a 401 unauthorized. But we have two problems. The first problem is that we haven't actually found a way to tell ASP.NET who is logged in and what roles they have, nor do we have a way to actually make this a little bit nicer looking than a HTTP 401 unauthorized. What we want to have happen is we want to be redirected to the login form. So how do we
Okay.
do that, Steve?
You know I'm developing some sort of psychosis at this point,
Yeah, well, that's the plan. Okay, the way that we do that is by opening up our web.config. Inside of our web.config, we can fix both problems. We fix the problem of the redirect by adding in a parameter called authentication. Now, the authentication mode is going to be forms. Notice here we can also say Windows. The auto there. Nope. Yep. There we go. We can also say Windows, for example, if we were working on an intranet application. But in this case, we're doing forms authentication. Then I'm going to say forms login URL equals ~login. Now, it's unfortunate that I have to hard code the path in here, but it's necessary. There is no way to properly calculate the route and all of that fun stuff. So this is what I have to do.
So this is where earlier you said sometimes you may have to hard code it.
Right.
Gotcha.
So now if I come back here and refresh, hey, I was unauthorized and I got linked back to my login. Not only that, ASP.NET was helpful enough of having a return URL equal to where I started from, so that if I do manage to validate them, I can shoot them back off to where they tried to access. Okay, so that's really cool. But now we have two more problems. Again, we still don't know how to tell ASP.NET who's logged in, and we don't know how to make our login form actually, well, work. Let's figure out first how we can deal with the roles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a custom role provider. The custom role provider is the component that's used by many of ASP.NET's built-in bits of functionality that tells ASP.NET who is logged in and what roles they have. Actually, it doesn't tell them who's logged in, it tells them who is logged in has roles. Wow. Wow, that sentence was like...
That sentence was a mess, and yet I understood it, leading me to believe that I am, in fact, developing that psychosis.
That very well might be true. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a custom role manager. How do we do that? Or a role provider? Well, we create a class, and then we tell our ASP.NET about the class. And that's it. Those are the two steps. So I'm actually going to do step 2 first. I'm going to tell ASP.NET about the class, and then I'm going to create it. So don't freak out when I start referencing a class that doesn't exist, because we're going to put that together here in a moment. Underneath system.web, I can create another element called role manager. And I'm going to say enabled equals true. Then I'm going to say default provider equals simple blog role provider, which it doesn't exist yet. Then I'm going to open up a providers element. I'm going to say clear to clear all existing providers out of the providers that are installed. Then I'm going to say add name simple blog role provider. Now, it's important to understand, this name actually isn't the name of the class, although it will actually be the name. No, it won't. Yeah, this isn't the name of the class. This is just the name of the item inside of this field. So this default provider is being associated with this add. The final thing that we have to specify is the type. This is the class. We need to tell ASP.NET which class we are wanting to override the role manager with. This is going to be a class that doesn't exist yet, but we'll write it here in a moment. I'm going to say simple blog dot infrastructure dot role provider. Sound good?
Sounds good. And it's turning red because we haven't actually created it yet, right?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So let's go ahead and do that. Now, it's in simple blog dot infrastructure. So I'm going to create a folder in here called infrastructure. Remember how I said earlier on how all the code you write in ASP.NET MVC is going to fall into 3 buckets, M, V, or C, with the with a few exceptions?
We're just about to hit an exception.
This is an exception.
All right.
I don't consider a role provider to be a model, a view, or a controller. Instead, it's infrastructure. It's just a helper little bit thing that does something that plugs into the framework. So that's why I segment all that code off into a namespace called infrastructure. Okay, inside of infrastructure, I'm going to create the class role provider. Sound good?
Yep, I'm with you.
Now if I go back into web.config, guess what happens? The red
Look at
goes
that.
away.
It's gone.
Yep. Okay, so let's implement our role provider. What does our role provider need to do? Well, let's go ahead and make it first work. We need to make it work by having it inherit from system.web.security.roleProvider. Role provider is an abstract class that has a bunch of abstract methods that we need to implement. So let's go ahead and implement them. I'm going to say implement members. I'm going to say finish. And wow.
Boom.
That's a whole lot of stuff we don't want to deal with. The simple fact is only one of these methods actually needs to be implemented for the vast majority of ASP.NET MVC to work, if not all of it. And that is the get roles for user method. That's the only method that's invoked by default from ASP.NET MVC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to the top. Then I'm going to replace the body of every single one of these methods with throw new not implemented exception. The reason I'm doing that is in case sometime down the line someone tries to invoke one of these methods, I want it to throw an error and completely just shut down the website and throw an error, because I want to be notified immediately that someone else is trying to use one of these methods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically you're protecting yourself.
Right. I don't want the default implementations to be invoked if I don't know about it, because that could cause potentially unwanted behavior. Okay.
That's cool, because I was wondering why you didn't do your usual just delete everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much. Okay, so what does get roles for user do? Well, it takes in a username and it returns a string array. The string array is going to be every single role that the user is in. So let's go ahead and say, just for sake of example, I'm going to say new admin. That's an array of strings with one member called admin. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I go into admin posts now? Well,
I have no idea.
if I can type it in,
Ah!
it has to have a username before it'll invoke this method. Which actually is a perfect time to talk about something I was going to mention in this video. The difference between authorization and authentication. Authentication is the act of determining if a person is who he says he is. Authorization is the ability to know who a person is and then determine what he has access to, what he's authorized to do.
Gotcha.
They're two separate concepts.
Absolutely.
So authorization and authentication is important. Since we have not authenticated anything, we weren't even getting so far as to have ASP.NET authorize our request. So let's go ahead and jump back into my auth controller, into login, and let's go ahead and make it so that we do start to actually use the authorization library, or authentication library, sorry. So what do I need to do that? Well, I'm going to delete this code, by the way. Obviously, that's not going to be used forever. And for now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say forms authentication, which is provided in the system web security namespace. Watch when I hit enter, a system web security using statement appears on line 6.
Okay.
I'm going to say forms authentication dot set auth cookie, and I'm going to pass in a username of form.username and a create persistent cookie of true. Now, what does this do? This is the second piece of the puzzle. So remember, this is the authentication. This is the authorization. This is how we tell ASP.NET that a person is who he says he is. This is how we tell ASP.NET that a particular person has access to a particular thing.
Gotcha.
Now, the way I wrote this code is I don't have any username or password checking. In fact, all I do is I check to make sure that it's not blank, right?
Yeah, so right now we can just put in anything.
Right. What that will do is that will set an authorization or an authentication cookie onto our web browser so that we know that we're logged in. All the encryption and hashing and validation is handled by ASP.NET for us. So that's very nice. All we have to do is say set auth cookie, give it a username, set its persistenceness, and we're good to go.
Very cool.
So if I come back here and hit refresh, and I say username Nelson password test, see what I forgot to do?
We forgot.
Hit F6.
Ah.
I told you that would eventually come to bite me on something.
Yep, yep. And I've been so I've sworn to myself that I'd be ready for commit. I forgot all about F6.
Okay, so for this particular example, I'm going to open up my Resources tab and look at my cookies. Notice that the site has no cookies. I'm now going to log in, and I'm going to get this form as valid. Look what just popped up.
Sweet.
ASPX auth. This is an encrypted cookie that tells ASP.NET who is logged in. So now, what's going to happen is if I go to admin/posts, I am allowed in. So let's talk about why I'm allowed in. Well, I'm authenticated to the site because I've set the auth cookie for whatever username I typed in. And I'm authorized for the admin panel because, well, actually everybody's authorized for the admin panel because I'm not checking to see what the username is. So let's put in some additional code here. I'm going to say if username equals Nelson, then return admin, otherwise return new empty string array. I'm complaining about. Come on, there you go. Okay, so what I'm saying here is if the username is set to Nelson, then he's an admin. Otherwise, he's nothing.
Okay.
So let's go back into my login form. I'm going to re-log in as a different user. I'm going to log in as, well, first I'm going to come back here and hit F6, of course.
There we go. I wouldn't have caught that again.
Oh, you wouldn't be able to believe how many times that's bitten me. Anyway, so the username I'm going to set to Bleh, password Bleh, hit enter. It says this form is valid. Now I go to admin posts and I get redirected to the login. That's because I'm not Nelson. If I instead type in Nelson and whatever password I want because we're not checking it and hit login, it says this form is valid. But when I go to admin/posts, I now have access.
Very sweet. So we're starting to build up both our authentication and our authorization.
Yep. Okay, before I talk about, well, actually, let's go ahead and add in the return URL real fast. Remember how, whoa, I just arrow shook everything away. Sorry
All right,
about that, guys.
We're back. It's all good.
So I'm going to go ahead and log back in as a user that isn't Nelson. Right?
Okay.
And then I'm going to go to admin posts. I want to take advantage of the return URL. If we successfully log in, I want to redirect the user to wherever they were trying to go, right?
Correct.
Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go into my auth controller, and I'm going to add string return URL. Guess what? That string return URL will be automatically set to whatever the value of this query string parameter is by the model binder.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yep, that's all I need in order for the model binder to pick up on this query string parameter. So instead of returning content this form is valid, I'm going to say if not string.is null or white space return URL. So if a return URL was provided, return to or return redirect to return URL. Otherwise, return redirect to route home. So if a return URL exists in the query string, then we redirect the user to whatever the return URL is set to. Otherwise, we redirect to route home. It may be a good idea to add in some checks here to make sure that you're not redirecting to a different domain for certain security purposes, but we won't worry about that in this case. So now I'm going to rebuild with F6. Come back here. So notice how I do have a return URL set.
Yep.
I'm going to type in Nelson and Nelson, hit enter, and I get redirected to admin posts.
Nice.
Alrighty, so how are you feeling about all this fun stuff?
This stuff is amazing.
Awesome.
And you are not an idiot. You're relatively brilliant.
Yeah, except no.
I'm sticking with it. I don't care.
Okay, there's one more thing I want to do here. I want to implement a logout, and I want to show the user who's currently logged in on the layout. So let's do that one first. I want to say welcome back, blah, if they're logged in. How do I do that? Well, the awesome thing about the fact that we actually are now using ASP.NET's authentication system and authorization system is that we can take advantage of that automatically within our views. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my layout view, and I'm going to say if user.identity.isAuthenticated, then display a logout link, which is a href URL route URL logout, which has not been written yet. So we'll write that soon. Logout. And then I'm also going to say welcome back user.identity.name. If they're not authenticated, I'm going to show them the login screen. Finally, I want to say if user.isEnroll admin ahref URL dot action index posts new area admin. Okay, we have a little bit to talk about now.
Indeed we do.
First of all, the user property. The user property allows us to get the current user on the current thread, which is set by ASP.NET, which allows us to say user identity is authenticated to determine if user is logged in. Next, user identity name will be the username of the user, so we can print that out. And if they're authenticated, we want to say hi to them, and we want to give them a logout link. Next up, we want to say if user.isEnroll admin, we want to give them a link to the admin. But there's something weird about this Razor code. Glad this came up.
And I have no idea what it is.
Well, look at this. This if statement has an @ symbol in front of it. This if statement does not have an @ symbol in front of it.
Okay, so one should be C# and one would be HTML to Razor then, right?
Nope.
And I'm lost.
Yep, this is actually a very confusing thing for a lot of people. I see a lot of people will do something like this, put the @ symbol here. It's invalid. Let me tell you why it's invalid. It's invalid because this C# code appears immediately within another C# block.
Okay, I'm following you.
Because this if statement opens up its own C# block, this if statement does not need to redeclare that it's C# code. Razor knows that this is HTML because we open up with an opening tag.
And so without that tag, then it understands that that continues the C# code.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And because it's C# code already, we don't have to redeclare ourselves with the @ symbol. In fact, it's an error to do this.
Gotcha. Yeah, I could see that would really screw people up.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so that was just a fun little aside for a little Razor tidbits. The Razor tidbits will just have to be interjected in all the times that they make sense to be. Anyway, the next interesting thing is that we have view posts and admin. Note that I'm not using route URL. I'm using url.action. url.action allows me to create a URL to any arbitrary action inside of my project, assuming that there's a route that it figures out how to reverse engineer. I'm not going to go in the process of actually how that happens. All that matters are these three parameters. We are going to the index action, so follow me with these parameters here, right? Action name, index. We are going with the posts controller, right? Controller name posts. But that's not enough. The reason that's not enough is there are two post controllers. There's one on the front end and one on the back end. So how do we tell this link generation to generate one for the admin? Well, we do that with our third parameter, our route values. We simply say area equals admin.
All right, I gotcha.
Awesome. Now that we have our markup generated, I want to go ahead and implement our logout. So remember, our logout is a route, but our logout route doesn't exist yet. So we have to go into our app start, route config, and create a new one. I'm simply going to copy and paste login and change the word login to logout. because that's all that we're really doing. I changed the name of the route. I changed the URL to the route. There we go. I changed the URL to the route, and I changed the action. Okay?
Gotcha.
Now I need to actually write the action, which is inside of my auth controller. So I jump back into my auth controller, and I create the logout action. So I'm going to say public action result logout, which is simply going to say forms authentication dot sign out. Then I'm going to say return redirect to route home. So what's my logout action do? Well, it signs out of formless authentication, which removes my authenticity token, and it returns me to the home route, which shows me the list of posts.
And that still actually made sense to me. All right.
Awesome. So F6 to build. I come back to my page, hit F5. Notice how I'm still logged in, and in fact have a link to view posts in admin. Now I can hit log out. When I log out, notice how that disappeared and a login link appeared instead, which I can now click on, type in Nelson. Actually, no, I'm going to do a non-admin user. I'm going to say whoa and test. So now it says, welcome back, whoa, but look what's missing. I'll give you a hint.
Oh, yeah, you don't have, I'm sorry, you were pointing at the logout, and I'm like, it's not missing, it's right there. But you don't have the admin page.
Exactly.
Link.
Yep. The link to the admin page doesn't exist because we're not in the role admin, because we're not Nelson.
Perfect.
Okay.
So, perfectly.
So I hope that this all made sense. The biggest goal of what we just accomplished is being able to do stuff like this inside of our views, in addition to being able to take advantage of our authorized attribute. Now, we will be revisiting our code very soon. The code that we will be revisiting is obviously going to be the login, and we are going to be revisiting the role provider. Why? Because right now, the login allows anybody with any username and any password to log into the site. And the role provider has a hard-coded, if you're Nelson, you're an admin. What we want to do is we want to make this database-driven. So we will be revisiting these two bits of code in the future and make it tied into a database as opposed to being hard-coded. But for now, I think that is really just about it.
Yeah, I think that we can commit what we've done and then move on to the next subject.
Awesome. So I'm going to open up source tree. Wait a second. Stage all my files. Go to commit. And I'm going to say implemented form authentication and custom role provider. And hit commit. Check our log history. And indeed, it's there.
That's awesome. All right, let's close this out and go to the next one.
Alrighty.